You're listening to the Cyberwire Network, powered by N2K.
This episode is brought to you by Polestar. There's only one true way to experience the all-electric luxury SUV Polestar 3, and that's to take a test drive. It can go from 0 to 60 in as little as 4.8 seconds with the dynamic handling of a sports car. But to truly understand how it commands the road, you need to be behind the wheel. Up to 350 miles of range, the 3D surround sound system by Bowers & Wilkins. It's all something you have to experience to believe. So book your test drive for Polestar 3 today at polestar.com.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Caveat, N2K Cyberwire's privacy, surveillance, law, and policy podcast. I'm Dave Bittner, and joining me is my co-host Ben Yellen from the University of Maryland Center for Cyber Health and Hazard Strategies. Hey there, Ben.
Hello, Dave.
And joining us once again is our N2K Cyberwire colleague and editor of the Caveat newsletter, Ethan Cook. Ethan, welcome.
Hey, guys. Good to be back.
Our topic today is federal preemption. While this show covers legal topics and Ben is a lawyer, the views expressed do not constitute legal advice. For official legal advice on any of the topics we cover, please contact your attorney. All right, gents, let's jump right in here. So, Ethan, you have written up quite a set of notes for us to discuss preemption here today. Maybe I start with you. Give us a little insights into this journey as you took on this topic.
Yeah, so, for a little behind the scenes look, after every deep dive, we internally always meet and kind of talk about, what's the next thing that's going to make sense to talk about, right? And there was a weird thing going on in Congress that we haven't seen in a little bit. And it's not that it haven't happened before, and it's not that it's not been, popular before, but it's not necessarily the flashy thing to talk about, but it had a lot of impact. And that was a moratorium going through the House at the time and has now gone through and failed in the Senate. But the whole point of it was to use federal preemption to negate all state AI laws that have been passed already and prevent any other ones from being passed for the next 10 years, which when you say that out loud, sounds really extreme and kind of convoluted and the antithesis of what honestly both parties kind of put forward, which is that we value states having opinions. There's a value there. No one really ever says states shouldn't ever be able to have any say over a matter. And this whole moratorium felt completely the opposite. It felt like it was a complete removal of power. And this has been done before. And it gained a lot of notoriety very quickly. And, as we were talking, Ben pointed out that this, while is a kind of off the beat subject, it had a lot of relevance and was worth looking into. And, since then, and after doing my research and writing this up, I would agree. This is a very interesting topic, and I think it's going to set up a larger conversation about what AI policy looks like in the next 5 years.
Ben, what do you make of this?
So first of all, I want to thank you guys and our audience for indulging, because this is really nerding out on a legal concept. But I hope to try and illustrate why I think preemption is such an important topic. Because a lot of what we discuss on this podcast are laws and policies. And in case you haven't noticed, Congress, though they've been a little bit more productive this year, is slow to address societal problems. It's polarized. It is famously inefficient. It has arcane rules that prevent just the routine passage of small pieces of legislation, things like requiring unanimous consent in the Senate for most things and having a 60-vote threshold for most things to get through the Senate. So that leaves the states, and the states generally are well-positioned. The Constitution gives states police powers to protect the health, safety, and welfare of their citizens. As long as states are not violating the federal Constitution or their own state constitutions, they can pass laws on anything. And they do. I think I mentioned in one of our previous episodes that Maryland just officially labeled the Orange Crush as our official cocktail.
Wow.
I didn't know that.
I did not know that.
Always on top of the critical issues here.
Okay.
So what makes preemption so interesting is it's the federal government taking the keys away from state governments and their ability to experiment with laws and regulations, especially on topics like artificial intelligence, where things are rapidly developing and state legislators and legislatures need to be nimble and to be able to develop fast-acting policy solutions to address problems that are impacting their citizens. And the reason that this AI provision, which ultimately failed, as you said, raised my eyebrows is that this would have handcuffed the states from responding to new developments in AI. And we've seen federal preemption in the past, and we're going to talk about this, Ethan, in a bunch of different areas. This is not an entirely new topic. One thing I think we had not seen is preemption in an area where Congress hasn't really done anything itself. There are no comprehensive federal AI regulations. We've had executive orders from the past two presidential administrations. Not much of that is kind of like binding policy. So it would be, all right, federal government hasn't passed any AI regulation. State governments can't pass any AI regulation. So who's going to protect us? And I think that just creates a really interesting dynamic. And I think it's worth discussing, not just in the context of AI, but everything from cybersecurity to data privacy. States pass a lot of legislation on these topics that are tailored to the specific desires of the electorates of those states. And federal preemption is a way of cutting off those efforts at the kneecaps. And so I think it's really important to discuss.
So before we dig into the details of this AI policy, can we touch on some of the history here? I mean, what is there in the Constitution that gives the feds the power to preempt the states?
So this comes from the Supremacy Clause, which says that federal laws are the supreme law of the land. The caveat to that, so to speak, is that Congress is limited to its enumerated powers. So Congress could only pass laws pursuant to Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, which has a list of things Congress can do. Because this was written in the 1780s, a lot of these items that are listed in Article 1, Section 8 seem kind of silly. But there are a few things that still apply: raising and supporting armies, protecting intellectual property. Those are domains of the federal government. The kind of catch-all that's been used to justify a lot of federal action is Congress's ability to regulate interstate commerce. So if Congress wanted to step in and regulate artificial intelligence, they could say, and Supreme Court precedent would back them up, that because this has a substantial effect on interstate commerce, Congress has the power to regulate it. So when you're in an area where Congress has an enumerated power, because of the Supremacy Clause, whatever Congress does usurps or supersedes the actions of state governments. So that's where the notion of preemption comes from. What the Supreme Court has held is that Congress has to be pretty specific and explicit about preempting state action. So there's something called implied preemption, where Congress passes a bunch of laws regulating something, and courts can imply that Congress intended to occupy the field. And that's happened in a number of different areas: regulation of food and drugs, ERISA, insurance regulation stuff. Then there are some areas where there is explicit preemption, where it's not implied, but it's actually written into the law that upon passage of this bill, states are prohibited from acting in this particular area. And that generally has been held to be constitutional in most circumstances. And that's what this AI provision would have done. It would have been explicit preemption, at least the House version of it.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's dig into the specifics of this. Ethan, what can you tell us about the history of this AI preemption? Any insights on its origin?
Yeah, so as many people have probably been aware of, there is a bill that just recently got passed called that I think has been the big beautiful bill, right?
Yeah.
And it is our reconciliation bill for this year, and it has got a lot of feedback, both good and bad, um, over the past couple weeks. And probably the most infamous moment it had was when it passed the House the first time, when a 2015 to 2014 vote, very, very narrow. And there was a lot of criticism, specifically to Republican lawmakers who had the majority, that this bill came together very quickly. It was not read through. It was voted upon and passed to the Senate without really any debate or discussion. And one of the things that happened after it went to the Senate was people started kind of breaking it down and actually looking what was in this thing. And they discovered this moratorium. And it gained a lot of pushback instantly from people basically saying that on both sides of the aisle, by the way, this was not just a Democratic pushback saying that this is not what we're about. We don't have anything in place federally to kind of cover our bases. We're taking away efforts. Obviously, state legislators were very, a lot of state lawmakers came out, were very perturbed about this. And the only real argument in favor of this was basically saying that, yeah, we are pulling this because we currently have too many state laws, and it is creating confusion. You have one state doing one thing that are requiring AI developers and AI deployers to do one thing, and then you have another state doing the exact opposite, or maybe it's a similar set of requirements, but the way they go about it are differently. So you have to do X, Y, and Z, and it gets really confusing. And what this whole process is doing is causing us to both lose economic advancement and technological innovation. And that was the crux of the argument of why we should preempt state laws in this. And then, and then I think the maybe goal was we would pass something eventually that would, at the federal level, that would legislate this and, bring some guidance. And then it went to, while in the Senate, there was a good back and forth between Senator Ted Cruz, who was writing it to make it legal within the Senate's version of the bill. And after it was approved by the Senate parliamentarian, Republicans pretty much unanimously pulled support for the moratorium, and it overwhelmingly failed to pass in the Senate and was killed before it was passed back to House, and the reconciliation bill was eventually passed in general. So while the moratorium is not in law and it has failed, I do think it opens the conversation of what does this mean for federal AI policy, because the fact that it made it this far and the fact that it was debated this heavily, I do think is worth noting.
All right, I tell you what, let's do a quick break here for a word from our sponsor. We'll be right back. Hey everybody, Dave here. I've talked about Delete Me before, and I'm still using it because it still works. It's been a few months now, and I'm just as impressed today as I was when I signed up. Delete Me keeps finding and removing my personal information from data broker sites, and they keep me updated with detailed reports, so I know exactly what's been taken down. I'm genuinely relieved knowing my privacy isn't something I have to worry about every day. The Delete Me team handles everything. It's the set it and forget it peace of mind. And it's not just for individuals. Delete Me also offers solutions for businesses, helping companies protect their employees' personal information and reduce exposure to social engineering and phishing threats. And right now, our listeners get a special deal, 20% off your Delete Me plan. Just go to joindeleteme.com/N2K and use promo code N2K at checkout. That's joindeleteme.com/N2K, code N2K. All right, we are back. Wasn't there some back and forth between Marjorie Taylor Greene and Ted Cruz? I think this is one of the things that she kind of said, I wasn't aware this was in here.
Yes.
It's frankly to her credit that she admitted it and was like,
Yeah.
Look, I'm a realist. I know that members of Congress aren't reading 1,000-page bills in their entirety. Now,
Right.
I think they should be briefed by their staff on everything that's in the bill. But yeah, she basically said, I voted yes on this without knowing about this AI regulation moratorium. If it comes back to the House and that's still in the bill, I'm going to vote against it. And she was joined by another very conservative lawmaker, Senator Marsha Blackburn of Tennessee. Tennessee has taken the lead in regulating certain criminal uses of AI, things like deepfake pornography. And so I think she was concerned that that type of regulation would have been preempted. So Marsha Blackburn was working with Ted Cruz, who was kind of the pro-preemption senator on this subject. They came up temporarily with a compromise where instead of there being a blanket moratorium, they would condition broadband funding to the states. So this bill provides AI-empowered broadband funding to help set up rural broadband across the country. And states would only be eligible for that broadband money if they did not regulate artificial intelligence. So it was kind of the carrot instead of the stick approach.
Right, like the old 55-mile-an-hour speed limit.
Right. Or the classic drinking age
Right.
one where it's like, if you bring it to 21, we won't slash your funding. But if you keep it under, you can, but you just won't get the money.
Right. And so it was, that sort of approach was held to be constitutional in those two circumstances. But then President Obama, through Obamacare, tried a different tactic in terms of conditioning funding. So they passed the Affordable Care Act with this pretty large expansion of Medicaid. And they said to the states, you either accept this expansion of Medicaid or you will lose all of your Medicaid funding. So not just the new funding, but all existing funding. Your state won't have Medicaid. And the Supreme Court said that that was too coercive. It was the federal government basically putting a gun to the head of the state. So I don't know how courts would have seen this. I think this is somewhere between drinking age and Medicaid. I don't think it's on either polar end. But that's kind of where the constitutional question would have lied, is this policy overly coercive? Is it forcing states to do something basically completely against their will? But then I think Marsha Blackburn kind of started to pull away from that deal, and I think Cruz realized he didn't have the votes. They actually put an amendment up to during consideration of the bill in the Senate to strip out this AI preemption provision, and it passed 99-1, which is just very interesting. I think it was one of those things where it was going to be out of the bill anyway, so what's the point in supporting this provision?
Right.
It's not like it's politically popular.
Wasn't worth fighting over.
Yeah.
I saw at one point he tried to cut it down to 5 years instead of 10.
Yeah, I mean, I think
They tried like 4 different things. They were going back to negotiations to try and make it work. It was approved by the parliamentarian. It was then unapproved by the parliamentarian. It was then reapproved by the parliamentarian. So it went back and forth through multiple iterations within the Senate, and ultimately just never gained the support they needed.
Yeah, and so at the end of the day, this provision didn't pass. I think from our perspective, it's worth noting what kind of state regulations this would have preempted. States have started to take action on AI policy, setting up governance structures for AI, promulgating rules on which AI tools can be used by various government agencies, doing inventory of AI systems in state government offices. Certainly in the criminal realm, restrictions on deepfake pornography. California passed a law restricting the use of artificial intelligence in political advertising. So depending on the version of this moratorium that would have passed, all of those laws would have been declared null and void because of this preemption provision. And so that would have just had pretty severe consequences. And I think the undercovered part of this is AI is developing so rapidly. We are so far from where we were in 2022 when we first learned about generative AI and LLMs. And we first started screwing around with ChatGPT. Think about how far we've come in those 3 years. If you look out on a 10-year horizon, which was the original proposal, who the hell knows what's going to happen? We could be controlled by AI overlords. They could be commandeering all of our cars and driving them into rivers. Like, we have no idea what problems are going to arise. And so I think...
Or benefits.
Or benefits. Yeah.
We could all be sitting around the pool with lovely cocktails with little umbrellas in our glasses, enjoying
Orange Crush cocktails in Maryland.
It is our official state cocktail.
With our AI assistants, doing all of our work for us, right?
Yeah. I just think, like, the big point here is if there are bad consequences, the federal government is not going to solve them in a timely manner because they never solve these problems in a timely manner. So we're reliant on state action. So if the federal government would have just handed us as consumers a double body blow. We are not going to regulate AI, and you're not allowed to regulate AI. And as a result, it goes completely unregulated.
It seems upside down to me that the feds are basically saying, you know what, we haven't been able to do anything in this space. And so we insist that you not be able to do anything either.
I think there's a dynamic of which it's not just that we haven't. I think this new administration does not want to. And I think that was really evident by within the first 2 weeks, Trump rescinded Biden's executive orders about having safeguards for AI. And there's been a lot of language coming out from that administration saying that whether it's J.D. Vance in Europe, saying that Europe needs to pump the brakes on its regulations and open itself back up to AI developers, whether it's talking about and putting in new policies. I think one of Trump's executive orders was all about not only just rescinding Biden's safeguards, but also how can we promote greater economic innovation regarding AI within here. And I think there's been a very clear message that regulation and safeguards on AI are hampering innovation. And removing those will enable the U.S. to continue its technological dominance. And there is a lack of desire for federal AI regulation.
And I think that's actually fine in theory. I could understand if you're OpenAI, Sam Altman, you do not want to be subject to 50 different regulatory regimes. I think that's completely rational. What's irrational to me is that you would impose those restrictions without setting some type of federal floor. And that's what's generally been done when we're talking about federal preemption. So federal government says we're going to regulate food and drug labeling. These are the things that have to be on the labels of the food we eat and the drugs that we take. And states are therefore not permitted to make additional requirements beyond that because we've occupied that field of regulation. At least in that circumstance, the federal government had set a floor that I think was a minimally acceptable floor. So if you're going to have a uniform standard, at least that standard was something, right? I think the problem with this regulation is that the standard would have been nothing. It's just, it's institutionalizing the wild, wild west, despite the deep uncertainty about where AI is going to be taking us in the next 10 years.
Well, I think another wrinkle to that is it's not just about, institutionalizing the Wild West, which I would agree with that. I also think there's a dynamic of to your point you said earlier, Ben, states are nimble. They can pass things faster. They can be more adaptive to what's going on and what their constituents are saying and things along those lines. But the federal government has proven for the past 20 years to be very ineffective at almost passing anything. And I would have a really big concern about, okay, even if we set the floor, is that floor actually impactful with how fast AI is changing? Sure, we pass that floor, we pull a bunch of state laws and we put them together, see what's working, what's not working, what we can all agree upon, what we can't. Pass that, great. And in 5 years, we saw in 5 years from 2022, or in 3 years, almost 4, it's changed completely. And what we need now, as opposed to years ago, is completely different. what does it look like in 5 years? And can realistically we be expected at the federal level to pass multiple floors that actually are impactful?
I also think, I think that's exactly right. From a political perspective, this also creates problems because you have members from some states who have already passed regulation who don't want the federal government to preempt their states.
Mm-hmm.
And that ends up killing legislation that would provide a reasonable floor. So that's what happened with data privacy. There was this proposed federal data privacy law. It was the end of the congressional session in 2022. There was a chance that that data privacy bill was going to pass in the lame duck session. Nancy Pelosi was still speaker, and she put a kibosh on it because California had already passed CCPA. And if they had passed this federal law, that federal law would have preempted the stronger protections that existed in the California law. So that's the political wrinkle here is there are always going to be members of Congress from states who have policies that exceed the congressional floor. I think the only way to make it work is a grand coalition where the floor that is established by the federal government is something, a compromise agreed upon by people who want more regulation and people who want less regulation. I think that's the only way it would ever work. And that in some ways seems like a pipe dream. Like, I don't know if we can ever actually find that perfect equilibrium. But because of the threat of federal preemption, I think it makes even politicians like Nancy Pelosi, who would usually be favorable to regulation, kill regulatory bills because they're worried about it preempting stronger state laws.
Isn't there a tension here between the because you have on the Republican side of the aisle the desire for as little regulation as possible, right? That a strong belief in that, and certainly this presidential administration believes that, as Ethan pointed out. On the other hand, also a strong desire for states' rights, right?
Yeah, absolutely. A strong professed desire for states' rights. And I think in most other circumstances, people with conservative leanings would say that states are better situated to regulate policy. I mean, that was the line on abortion politics for 50 years, that states have different political needs, priorities, situations, and they are best situated to set policies, not the United States Supreme Court. I do think there is a lot of truth in that. Now, it's not 100% foolproof. People hear states' rights and they think about civil rights in the 1860s, the 1960s.
Right.
And obviously, all of us believe that in those circumstances, the federal government was right to step in and supersede states' rights claims with things like the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act. But I think generally, at least in the abstract, there is something critically important about giving states flexibility. And that's the axiom about being laboratories of democracy, yes. So experimenting with different policies to see if they work. But it's also being able to tailor policies to the unique political coalitions that govern these states. And it's kind of more democratic in a small d sense. State legislators are closer to the people. They are elected from smaller districts. People, I think, have more of a chance to personally interact with their state legislature. So, like, there's a strong theoretical grounding to this, even though it's been misused in the past.
Let's do a quick break here for a word from our sponsor. We'll be right back. Krogel is AI built for the enterprise SOC, fully private, schema-free, and capable of running in sensitive, air-gapped environments. Krogel autonomously investigates thousands of alerts weekly, correlating insights across your tools without data leaving your perimeter. Designed for high availability across geographies, it delivers context-aware, auditable decisions aligned to your workflows. Krogel empowers analysts to act faster and focus on critical threats, replacing repetitive triage with intelligent automation to help your SOC operate at scale with precision and control. Learn more at Krogel.com. That's CROGL.com. Ethan, this was not popular with the general public, right? I mean, is it fair to say a majority of U.S. citizens are kind of looking at AI with at least one raised eyebrow?
Yeah, I would say that the moratorium was overall unpopular, which is why no one got support, and it really did not get any support in the Senate when it was finally discovered and actually fleshed out as a concept. Because it was, I think no matter how you sell this, I don't think it gains popularity. You go to the average person, hey, should the federal government prevent states from passing any AI laws? Most people would probably say no.
Right.
Let's even flip that on its head. Hey, do you think AI makers should have regulations imposed on them? Most people would say yes, right? I don't think there's any way you can really sell removing this without the huge part of having a floor established that makes it popular. I think there is a wrinkle to this that I am waiting to see where it goes over the next couple months / next couple years, which is, I think, with AI being this kind of untold promise of it could be everything great, it could be everything bad, it could be everything in between. I think federal lawmakers are the part of this inaction is the paralyzation of fear that over regulating any specific thing will cause us to collapse the industry and cause them to escape and go somewhere else. And there is a fear from an economic perspective. There is a fear from a technological innovation perspective. And I think the last one that's probably does not get as much attention as it deserves is a fear from a military perspective. I mean, OpenAI just signed $100 million of contracts with the Department of Defense to help them create their own AI platform, right? That is if OpenAI up and ends decides to leave and go, let's say, to Canada or name another country, that has a huge impact on our defensive capabilities. And while AI is not there yet, with how fast it's advanced in a couple of years, I think it will be there and potentially scaring off developers, as Europe, quote unquote, has done, is, I think, a major fear on both sides of the aisle.
Yeah, I mean, that is the other side of this. It's what you've just talked about. It's also geopolitical. We don't want our adversaries in China to be the innovators on AI. I mean, for a while, it seemed like the Chinese had done better at us at developing AI tools. I just think there are going to be regulations that protect consumers that don't doom the entire industry to being overregulated and therefore failing in the United States. And I think state legislatures are well situated to consider the pluses and minuses of those regulations and to balance those inequities. Are they always going to get it right? No, but they're nimble enough that if they don't get them right, they can come back the next month, the next year, and change policies in a way that I just don't think Congress is capable of doing. So I kind of come back to this idea that even if you are fearful of overregulation, you'd rather have the nimble, flexible, varied approaches of state governance than whatever you would get from an inert federal Congress, even despite all of the factors that we've discussed.
Can we go up a level and just talk about the place that we are in where something like this gets inserted into this gigantic mega bill? And rather than having consideration or standing on its own, we end up with things like this, where you have a legislator like Marjorie Taylor Greene saying, I didn't know this was in there, right? I mean, that just shouldn't be. it makes everything harder, right? And yet here we are.
Yeah, so most state legislatures have single subject rules, meaning like if you have a bill about the Chesapeake Bay, you can't hide an AI provision in there.
Right.
Like it has to all relate to a single subject. One of my longtime hobby horses is that the reason Congress can't have single subject bills is just that they are handicapped by arcane Senate rules. Congress has to do a bunch of things every year. Most notably, they have to pass appropriations bills. There are also authorization bills that have to pass, like the big military defense authorization bill. And the way the Senate rules are set up, any one senator, let alone the minority party, can just kind of indefinitely delay things. So if you demand a vote on cloture, then you're entitled to 30 hours of debate pre-cloture. And then you have to get 60 votes to continue on most pieces of legislation. And then you get 30 hours to debate after cloture. Then you balance that with the fact that senators don't want to be there all the time debating. They want to be in their districts. They have to fundraise.
Yeah.
They're off raising money. And the clock really starts ticking quickly. In state legislatures, none of this is a problem. I follow the Maryland state legislature where they have single subject bills, and they are fully capable of passing 20 bills in a matter of minutes. But it's the Senate rules that prevent Congress from having that power. And I think all of this is a downstream effect from those rules. So my hobby horse, my longtime political goal is to reform these Senate rules so that we can operate more like a state legislature. State legislatures are just as democratic. They reflect the will of the voters. We can even still have a 60-vote threshold, but just getting rid of all of these unanimous consent requirements and time requirements that prevent the Senate from acting on a sufficient number of legislation to cover the needs of the federal government. And that's my soapbox.
It's a fair soapbox to be on, by the way.
Is it fair to say there are those who would say that those slowdowns are a feature, not a bug?
Yeah, totally. And people do say that, like, oh, well, shouldn't we have more time to debate? They're not. It would be great if they were actually on there debating for all 30 hours. That would be great.
Right.
If you turn on C-SPAN 2, that's not what happens.
Yeah.
They're usually in a quorum call, which is just the Senate floor sitting empty while one presiding officer is doing their crossword puzzle, waiting for the clock to hit those 30 legislative hours. So I believe that the Senate can still be the so-called cooling saucer that slows down the passions of the House. There are still ways to do that without having these time requirements and requiring unanimous consent of 100 people to do anything.
Right.
I think there are ways to reform the institution while still allowing it to check the excesses of the House of Representatives.
So, Ethan, this is dead for now. This AI bill is dead for now. Any sense of those who lost on this one? We've been talking about Ted Cruz, for example. Any sense for whether or not they're going to try to come back and fight another day with this?
I would be shocked if they didn't. I think there is too much money behind AI that actively would like to see this pump the brakes on some of the state legislation going on. I think there is too much military incentive. We are a defense-oriented country. We spend a lot of money on defense, and AI has a lot of potential there. And I think that is a huge driver, and there's some big people behind that. I think we have an administration that's friendly to deregulation. So that's a huge win for that argument, as opposed to the previous. So I think the underlying factor that's also kind of there is that midterms are coming. They will be there in a year, a year and some change, and that may or may not, historically speaking, election-wise, typically midterms are a flip back to the other party, no matter who's in power. So if you're going to go based off historical data, it should flip back to Democrats. Now, that's not guaranteed. Things happen.
Right.
But that's historically what does happen. And there is I feel a big urgency right now among Republican lawmakers who currently have a majority in both chambers, majority in the Supreme Court, and a majority obviously control the White House, to get as much passed as possible within this 2-year period before any chance of disruption occurs. And I would not be shocked if we see something come through. I would be shocked if it was this summer before the legislative session broke out, but I would not be shocked if we saw it be something proposed again by the end of the year, and certainly something being proposed next year. I don't think it's going to be as egregious as this one was, because I think pretty much everyone was like, this feels a little, 10 years is a lot of time. That feels a little too much.
Mm-hmm.
But I wouldn't be shocked if we saw a 3-year or a 4-year or a 5-year, and more language that supports, for to call it the show name, some caveats
Mm-hmm.
in there that allow for some, greater provisions on, let's say, deep fakes, and saying, okay, that has nothing to do with actually hampering AI. That's how we use it. That has nothing to do with the application and development, right? I think there would be more things along the lines of restricting what risk assessments are required, what governance requirements, compliance requirements are required on a state level, how this impacts specific industries, whether that be healthcare or finance or defense. I think those are probably the things that are going to be targeted. I would be really shocked if this isn't attempted again, but I do not think it will be in a single bill. I think it's going to be, again, stapled into something, tried to pass largely without people being aware of it, and hopefully get it passed as this was very clearly attempted to do.
Yeah. I guess the other side is now, the Marjorie Taylor Greens of the world they have their radar up now. They're going to be, more vigilant, right?
Yeah. I would be shocked if people aren't paying a little bit more attention to AI for the next couple months, which I think behind the scenes, there's going to be a lot of conversations related to this and what the next steps are, what should people be thinking for, et cetera. I do think one dynamic that I'm curious to see how this kind of plays itself out over the next couple months with both houses and both chambers, and to your point, Ben, about the kind of the slowness of how how Congress operates in general, will be, if it takes longer than I think, let's say it takes a year and a half, how far has AI come in that time period? What have states done and passed since then? And does that have to change? Because in that a year and a half doesn't sound like a lot of time, but when you compare that's pretty much half the lifespan of AI since it's come onto the scene, how much it's changed in just that amount of time period, I think that could fundamentally change what that bill looks like and what that moratorium looks like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's hard to imagine legislation that doesn't end up being reactive or, obsolete by the time it's passed.
Especially with AI advancing at what it does.
Yeah.
Right. All right. Any final thoughts, Ben, before we wrap things up this week?
Should I stand on my soapbox again and talk about Senate rules? No, I think I think I've covered it enough. And I think Ethan's prognostication is accurate. And I'll note that they will have a couple more opportunities for these reconciliation bills, which are not subject to the Senate filibuster. I think they blew their one opportunity to sneak this into the bill without people noticing, so they won't be able to get away with that again, which I think Ethan touched on well.
Yeah. It's interesting to me, like, we noticed it, those of us covering the cyber beat, we were talking about it from the very beginning. It's like, I guess as people
I remember seeing it, and I was waiting for it to pop up into the general news, and it took a week or two before people really started kind of like, what is this?
Right, exactly.
I guess what you're saying is that Marjorie Taylor Greene does not read my tweets.
Right, not a regular listener of the Cyberwire,
No.
I guess. Well, what are you going to do?
She's always welcome. Welcome on here anytime.
Yeah, well, maybe she will be now. You never know. All right. Well, Ethan Cook is the editor of our Caveat newsletter. Ethan, thank you so much for joining us here again this week. We look forward to having you back again soon. And now, a word from our sponsor, ThreatLocker, the powerful zero-trust enterprise solution that stops ransomware in its tracks. Allow Listing is a deny-by-default software that makes application control simple and fast. Ring fencing is an application containment strategy, ensuring apps can only access the files, registry keys, network resources, and other applications they truly need to function. Shut out cybercriminals with world-class endpoint protection from ThreatLocker. And that is Caveat, brought to you by N2K Cyberwire. We'd love to hear from you. We're conducting our annual audience survey to learn more about our listeners. We're collecting your insights through the end of this summer. There's a link in the show notes. We do hope you'll check it out. This episode is produced by Liz Stokes. Our executive producer is Jennifer Eiben. The show is mixed by Trey Hester. Peter Kilpie is our publisher. I'm Dave Bittner.
I'm Ben Yellen.
And I'm Ethan Cook.
Thanks for listening.